Good morning, everyone. I love seeing everyone spread out. People all the way in the back. It's good. I saw everyone learning new tactics today. I saw the foot tap, the elbow tap, the fist bump, the nod. I've seen it all. So I think we all need to be cautious in this time. But I thank you for coming out today. My name is Rushi Raja, President and CEO at CORE. I think most people here probably know CORE. Is anyone here at their first CORE event? Oh, so we do have a few. Perfect. So CORE is a not-for-profit. We were founded in 2005. We were actually formed by IBM, CIBC, PwC, Air Canada, Bombardier, Goodman's, and a few other organizations who got together. They said there was too much biased information around third-party vendor management, on sourcing, on insourcing, on outsourcing, and they said we needed an agnostic group to run events like this, where our mandate is to provide information, an agnostic value to different organizations, and teach them how to handle these relationships and typical challenges they face. We run events, there's probably 2 a month, as I'm sure you guys see all the emails. I will tell you, due to the current situation, some of these events will most likely be delayed, or we're probably going to move them online for the next few, so stay on the lookout for emails about that. But all the missions on our site, our Women in Sourcing event will be coming up, risk management, our 2-day course, transition management. We also have a governance course coming up, but during the break, if you have any questions, I'll fill you in. But again, some of these dates may change in the next 48 hours as we update our calendar. So the reason we're here today is we do poll our audience quite often on what are the challenges you are facing, what you want to learn about. You've seen we've done sessions on blockchain, we've done sessions on governance before. And one topic that kept coming up is business case writing. And the challenge we kept hearing are people who have created a business case, you're never confident in that business case, and what did I forget? Is there a cost that I should have included that I didn't? What did I overinflate? What did I underinflate? So we decided to host a session on this. We're very happy. We have Barbara Beller, the associate partner from Everest Group, who'll be joining us shortly. We also have Amit Majithia. He's the new country head for Wipro, so welcome to Canada. Amit Wade Frost, senior manager from Hydro One, who's an accountant. We can't do a business case session without an accountant. And Joel Ramsey from Torys will be joining us. So I first want to welcome up Barbara Beller. Barbara Beller has spent her career helping Fortune 500 companies through various different situations and sourcing arrangement. Also spent some time at Accenture. And fun fact, Barbara was actually my boss in my previous life. And she told me she hates it when I call her boss, so I will call her boss multiple times today. Ladies and gentlemen, Barbara Beller.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. And yes, Rishi knows how to push that button around calling me boss all the time. But welcome to everyone. So it's an interesting topic that we have this morning. And we're going to be talking about some business case pitfalls. We hear this all the time. I'm going to bring some client examples as well. That we have, we're hearing about different things. And again, with the environment that we've got as well, I'm going to bring some examples this morning. So one of the things I wanted to talk about this was when we talk about this in business, but everybody at some point in time has to go through a renovation. And as I thought about this, what the similarities were and some of the pitfalls were, everybody has experienced some kind of renovation in their life. So as we prepare for renovations, this is similar to preparing for and preparing the business case. There are things that we need to consider. Things that we often overlook, things that, as Rushi said, we undervalue, we underestimate, and it can make the difference between success or failure with a renovation. So similar to that, we're going to talk about the blueprint and the business case today around a renovation. So there's a few topics that we'll discuss today. I'd like to make this, we're a smaller group today. If you've got any questions, we'll save the questions. We've got a panel at the end. But if you've got any questions around this, certainly feel free to ask. We're going to cover the value of the business case, some key success factors as you're building the business case, some things around essential criteria, around what to look for to make sure that your business case is complete, it's thorough, and it's accurate. and some of those unforeseen costs, those activities, those things that you don't think about that can dramatically impact the success of your business case, and then some other pitfalls to consider, right, today. So the value of a business case. So in terms of the way businesses look at business cases, obviously they prepare a business case because there's some need for the organization, for the business unit. So what they do is understanding, should we go, no go? Should we make an investment into this project, or shouldn't we do that? Traditionally, the way that success of a business case has been looked at is, does it meet a time, a budget, or some agreed upon deliverables? And that was the way that traditionally you would measure success of a business case. However, what organizations have found, the results are that they need some other kind of value. They need to look at sort of the benefits beyond those kind of three areas of time and budget. And the benefits, as you go through a project that's been agreed to, some of those values and those benefits get leaked away. So if a project is actually, you get a go to go ahead with one, and it's been commissioned without a strong, solid business case, a lot of serious problems can arise. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And a lot of those things are around, you have now put, or the organization has put resources in place, and those could be time, those could be people, and other resources in place, and you cannot afford to use those unwisely. So this is the justification why you need a solid business case. Okay, so just these are a little bit of foundation on this before we get into some of the success factors. So the business case itself is the core of the project and the foundation of the success. So maintaining and developing a solid business case, maintaining it it helps ensure that all the parties have a common understanding. And we'll talk a little bit about this later around some of the success factors, but you have everybody that's involved has a common understanding on the value of the project and what it is intended to deliver at the end, including the benefits of that. The organization, it sets up the organization to have a clear basis of why it's worthwhile continuing doing the project itself. As I mentioned before, it is the plan to make sure that the resources are used effectively and aligned to the right projects. And the priorities are clearly established for the project and for the organization, as well as you've got something in place to measure the success of the project. Okay? So if it's in fact, if the business case is planned, it's developed and planned and managed effectively, that's what dramatically increases the likelihood that the project will be successful. All right, so how do you actually build a successful business case? I think the one part of this is to understand is that there is no silver bullet. There is no one magic template that is going to allow you to build the perfect business case. The business case can also take many forms. It depends on what you're looking to achieve. And we'll talk a little bit about that around identifying those reasons to actually do the project. Okay? In order for it to achieve its purpose, the business case has to be tailored to the individual needs of both the business and the organization. Okay? Now, there are some excellent models out there, but at the end of the day, you need to decide based on those other criteria of what you're looking to achieve and what the priorities are. Sometimes it makes sense just to start from scratch and build upwards. Okay, so that's one thing that to take into consideration. So we talk about sort of the world of all business cases, scope specific or priority specific, and then organization specific. Need to think about that. All right, So there's a lot of words here, and probably in the back, you'll probably see tiny, tiny words on here. You'll be able to see the presentation. But I think the one thing that we want to talk about, as we said before, business cases are unique, but there are some common characteristics and common questions that you need to address. The content should always address what you're looking to do, why you're doing it, who needs to be involved, as well as how the case itself might change or evolve throughout time. And that's a really critical part because while you may snap the line, I use this analogy a lot, to snap the line at the beginning when you do your base case and you start to decide things, as we know currently in the market and the situation right now, things change. You have to have some flexibility and evolve. So the first thing that you need to, first characteristic in every business case is identifying why you are actually doing it. What is the problem you're looking to solve, whether that's within the business or the organization? Why should they actually consider the project? And we'll be coming back to this point because at the end of the day, this is the justification, this is the reason why the organization is actually going to do the project, and you have to keep that in mind as you keep building out, okay? What's the project background? What are the original circumstances that brought you to this situation where you're going to build a business case, or the thought is, you have a problem or a need that you need to solve, okay? Second part is, what is the time scale and the cost, okay? What are the, at a minimum, what's the time and the cost to bring that project to a conclusion? And then you have to think about what are the things that in those areas within that you're going to balance and trade off, okay? I have an expression I say to my teams all the time, you can do anything with time and money. Okay? But when you're building a business case, you have to understand what those parameters are. The other part of it is true is building in contingency, right? So contingency and planning, how are you going to refine and change as the project evolves and changes? I started to tell a story, and I said I didn't want to steal the thunder. This morning I was talking to some individuals. I was talking to an individual this week, and given the current situation, the current market situation, and the fact that we're looking at some workforces to work remotely now. When you build in a project, typically you will you will have some technology costs or some costs that are built in, and how much of that is around your workforce working in a location versus remote. And the individual I was talking to said they did a project recently, and they built into their business plan that 40% of their workforce would be remote. And what were the costs associated with that? That went up to 95% of their workforce working remote. And they did not build in that kind of contingency into the project, and what were the implications on that. So that's why you do the contingency. Where can the information be found? This is a really important one. Who owns the information that you need to build out that business case? How is that if one person who owns that information, if they make one decision, if that one person makes one decision, how does that impact other decisions along the way, okay? Maintaining extensive documentation around where the information is, who makes what decisions, and what are the assumptions, and we'll go into a little bit more detail around that, is critical, okay? That's what's going to get you your the foundation of that business case. Important part of the next one is, what are you trying to measure, and what are the options around it, okay? So what are you trying to measure right now in the business case in terms of the project itself, as well as that's going to come into play down the road as you start to move towards conclusion of the project, okay? So what are the parameters? What are the business objectives you're looking to achieve? And how are you going to be evaluating that? Coming up with that evaluation criteria when you're building the actual business case is important, okay? Planning scenarios, the what ifs. What's going to happen, multiple scenarios. Oftentimes when you're building business cases, we build in the positive side of it, Rushi mentioned the, over inflating the upside. You've got to plan those scenarios on the downside and multiple. What happens if, okay? And what are potential anticipated results? Now, in our current situation that we've got in the market, hard to anticipate that, but I can tell you, and somebody was mentioning before about business continuity, going forward, those things will be more taken into consideration. Okay, what are the major risks and opportunities? Okay, what are the threats and opportunities for that particular project? We oftentimes see in business cases that the opportunities are highlighted, but the threats are not. I'm currently working on a project right now, and the organization, while they're looking at all of the opportunities for cost savings, and we're building in this project, one of the things we brought to the forefront was the risk of the organization, the readiness of the organization to actually proceed with what they were planning to do, and what would be the cost associated with that, and the risks around that, whether it be what they needed to prepare and invest in, and also with how they had to manage change management as well, and the investment in that. Okay. The weight of the risk, we'll talk about this. Business case is about balancing cost and risk and those opportunities that are there. What can be done to improve accuracy? Oftentimes we hear is that there was some flaws in the business case. How we actually build that accuracy to when we're building from the ground up, to also how we measure it going forward. So build in a process to refine it continuously. I talked about kind of snapping the line at the beginning, what the business case looks like, but having a mechanism in place where you can continue to refine that as you learn more information is important, okay? Having some flexibility, performing regular quality checks, okay? So does the information change? Was there differing information in there? Making sure that the quality is there, okay? Asking for input and advice from others. So this goes back to where the information can be found, making sure that you validate the information and check it around number of sources. You may find that there's some disagreement on those, and this can help you when you address those to ensure that the accuracy is there when you build the business case, okay? And then duplication. Avoid entering the same information more than once, right? Again, I'll just give you an example. Another project that I was working on, we were working on projects across multiple different functions. And when we took a look at the technology costs, we actually had to go back to the business case and say, we've covered that in one business unit. We've already covered that in another function. So it impacted the business case because we duplicated the technology costs across all of them. We had to identify what was across the organization versus what was unique to the business unit. Okay? All right, so what's the key success factors? We talked about those consistent areas that you need to include in your business case. But one of the most important things to get a successful, solid business case is getting buy-in on the approach in the process early. Understanding and getting a clear understanding of what the value proposition is, why you're doing the project, and that the people in the organization that are going to help you buy into the approach. This is something that can make a business case go off the rails very early, okay? And a project for that matter. The details are important, but really never lose sight of the big picture. Why should the organization or the business unit make the investment to begin with, okay? Everything you do should come back to that. Why are you doing this? Does it make sense to do this? And as you build down and get down in the weeds in there, make sure it aligns back to the original objectives. Okay? Make sure that the business case includes both financial and non-financial factors. And then also make sure that you build a strong fact-based baseline. All right? Sometimes this step in terms of building the baseline is rushed, and it comes back to haunt you as you build the business case, and these are the things that can contribute to flaws as you build it out. All right, so we talked about thoroughness and accuracy, some of the things. This is a little bit more detail on here. I hope you can see that in the back of the room. So really around the thoroughness of your business case and accuracy is around getting agreement on your approaches. So getting understanding of what the benefits and the drawbacks are, and your decision-making metrics, those things around MPV, around cash flow, around and what discount rate you're going to use. Also with those are decision-making metrics, but who is going to make those decisions along the way? And bringing them goes back to that key success factor is getting alignment and buy-in along the way. Oftentimes what you might happen is on these decision-making metrics, when you do not have that consistency, you may have one executive that says, yeah, we're going to approve this based on this metric, and then the other one says on another, and they do not align. They're not aligned, and that can derail it. How are you going to handle investments? How are you going to handle investments? You need to get agreement on that up front as well. Agreement on key assumptions, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail on this. This is probably one of the most critical elements, is getting agreement on those assumptions, because they need to be realistic and they have to be understood and aligned with what the organization is looking to do. If you do not have agreement on those, if you make overinflated assumptions, those things will fall apart pretty quickly as you go ahead, okay? Prioritize what is truly important, okay? And what let's talk about here around the price to play. Why is the organization doing this? And at the end of the day, what are they looking for? What's the reason why, what's the cost of you actually doing this? So what is truly important to both the business and the organization itself, okay? Do your research. Do your research, do your research, okay? So make sure that you confirm with the business, the organization itself, take a look at market expectations and experiences within the organization to help you build that out. And that's going to tie into some of your assumptions as well. If the organization has a completely different way and different set of assumptions that they do based on their experiences, and you make a different assumption, you're going to run into some problems, okay? Address conflicting or dated data. Do that early. Make sure that the data that you're using is current and that you address those things. So we talked about making sure that you get the right individuals involved in this and you get their input. If there's conflicting data, address it early. Acknowledge areas of weakness, right? So this is a broad category, obviously, but there may be areas where you don't have data, or it's been incorrect, or there's areas of weakness where you found that multiple projects have gone through and they've been inflated assumptions. And if that's a history, address those early, okay? Make sure that you identify all of the costs, the revenue, the risks, and how you intend to mitigate those risks. All right, I love this picture. So unforeseen costs and activities, and they usually lie right under the surface, okay? So typical unforeseen costs and activities, financial and technology costs. I already addressed one, what I think the individual I was talking about with the remote or doing things virtual with their workforce is their technology costs for their remote. They had only budgeted in, again, for 40% of their workforce to do that. So they now needed globally that technology costs skyrocket, okay? Third-party costs, advisory costs. Do you need help? Are you going to get help from an advisor on the project? Legal costs, oftentimes overlooked or as an afterthought. Those things not only to actually to do the project itself, let's say you're doing a sourcing project, to actually help with that sourcing event, but the ongoing legal costs, if you have change controls, if you have contract renewals, those things to consider ongoing for the life of the project. Location-specific costs, okay? So are there anything around whether you're considering doing a project in a different location? Is there different costs around, resources in one city versus another? Are there any benefits that you need to take a look at? Unanticipated allocations that skew decision making. So what we talk about this, and I'll give an example, is working on a project where as the organization did business cases, they took an accounting approach versus, and so how they did allocations really didn't identify the true costs of doing the service itself. So the example that I'll give you, we said, well, what is the cost per employee to perform that service? What's the technology costs, for a laptop or for a desktop, that type of thing? And for the actual real estate, what is the cost? What do we need to assume for that? The way that the organization had done it before, they said, well, we own the building, so that's a sunk cost. And we said, no. What is the cost to perform the service? And if you make a different decision, and if you remove that, do you carry that cost with you? So that's around allocations. Governance, often overlooked. Rushi mentioned you're going to have a session on governance. If you're looking to source source work, how are you going to manage that relationship? Oftentimes, governance cost is overlooked in building the business case, but it's one of the first areas where value is leaked. Okay, so and making sure that not only during transition, but ongoing as well. Severance costs. This is an area where either it is overlooked or it's underestimated. Okay, so this one, and it can seriously impact your business case, right? Leadership benefits costs, and then inflation. So things like COLA or even foreign exchange, things like that are often underestimated or overlooked as well. And as you can imagine with this list, you start to chip away at the business case. Okay. All right, other pitfalls. Okay, so some other pitfalls to watch out for as you're building the business case. So we talked a little bit about this before around scenarios and options. Sorry. I'm dropping things. All right, so we talked a little bit about this. As you're building out those options in your business case, build out multiple scenarios. Upside, downside, what trade-offs need to be made in the models that you make, okay? We talked about this already around assumptions. So these assumptions are not internally consistent and not validated, not agreed to. So this causes confusion in the organization and as you're building out the business case itself. Okay? Inflation and growth projections are not accurate. Often growth projections are overinflated. Research, doing your research. I talked about how important that is. Inadequate or incomplete research, okay, including information on the market trends and what the industry is doing is crucial to building the business case. You have to understand that, and that comes into your assumptions. Are your assumptions realistic to what's actually happening in the market? If you do your research, you should be able to validate your assumptions, okay? Where are the areas of growth? Where are the areas of decline? Risk is understated, all right? So in Everest Group, we have a methodology that we use. The acronym was actually with a client of mine just recently. They were having some issues and they laughed at the acronym because it's FOOLS. It's financial, organizational, operational, legal, and strategic risk. You need to identify what all of those risks are, what is the likelihood of those, what's the probability of those, and have something identify how you would mitigate those risks. The risks exist, it's just the degree to which they exist, okay? Plans don't accurately present short-term and long-term views of the business. Make sure that you include specific milestones. Okay, so often the lens is too short, or it's, there's not specific milestones to have checks along the way. Okay. All right, so a few parting thoughts that come back to my renovations. So, you know, I've done many renovations. One of the things that I always do when I talk to my contractors and do the due diligence on it, there's multiple things that I do as I build my own business case for my projects that I do, is I build in the contingency, but I also have a conversation around validating those assumptions and saying that, okay, so to the contractor, I will say, if I change it, it's on me. The cost is on me. I've built in some contingency. You open up a wall and surprise, something that you didn't see. But if there's something around outside of those assumptions that are not my responsibility, who pays for those? Okay. So again, when you think about this, when you think about building your business case, make sure that we talked about the details, those detailed costs. Remember to pull it up and think about what is the big picture, what is the objective, what are you looking to achieve. Make sure that you build into your process as you build out the business case regular sanity checks, okay? Even at a high level, you want to go at various levels. Ensure that you haven't overlooked something, particularly something that will have a material impact now with that no-go decision, as well as down the road when things evolve and change, okay? Don't get stuck in the weeds. There's going to be a lot of data that you're going to be collecting, and it can be overwhelming. You're going to get it from multiple sources. Again, so coming back to get the data, get all of that data, do your research, but every once in a while come up to say, you know, let's not stay down in the weeds in that detail, because you will forget the vision of where you want to go. Okay? Think of creative ways to organize that information and display it in clear and concise ways. Okay? Again, keeping into consideration the big picture. As you start to model out and alternative scenarios as well, think about that creative way as to how you're going to use that data, right? And then again, at the end of the day, remember the business case value is around balancing cost, benefit, and risk. Make sure that you don't overinflate the benefits. Make sure you capture all the costs, and you understand and have a plan to mitigate all the risks. Great. Thank you.
I'm Joel Ramsey. I'm a partner here at Torrey's, and I do quite a bit of technology and sourcing work and pretty much everything that has to do with digital these days. And as a lawyer, I'm here to sow seeds of doubt. So please, no, I have lots of interesting, well, I think they're interesting questions to ask the panel, and I'm sure all of you do too. I'll let them introduce themselves. When we get started with the questions, my view is as interactive as possible is best. We have all kinds of things we can talk about among the four of us, but if you have any questions, just let us know, and we'll, do we have a mic to pass around? Yeah, so we have a mic right over here that Hart will pass around, so you can ask the panel. So I'll let the others introduce themselves. Barb?
Why don't we start at the other end, since I've been introduced already.
Right, so hi, I'm Wade. I work for Hydro One. I've been there for 12 years, senior manager there, and I oversee a unit that reviews all business cases in the organization, from building new stations to outsourcing, and also oversee the financial modeling unit that actually evaluates these business cases.
Hi, good morning. I hope everyone can hear me. Amit Machithia. As Rishi mentioned, I just moved from UK, where I've been for many years living in the UK. Moved to Canada beginning of January to take the role as the country head for Wipro. I've been in IT services for about almost 31 odd years now, and predominantly in the oil and gas sector, where I manage large accounts for Wipro and other organizations, but also worked with a lot of organizations on the other side, in terms of putting some of these business cases for sourcing, etc. previously. So look forward to the conversations today. Thank you.
You want me to do it? do another one. So as you know, Barbara Beller, an associate partner with Everest Group. So with Everest Group, we are, if you're not familiar with them, we are a global organization that helps organizations. We specialize in next generation services. So all of the services that support the organization and helping organizations go from where they want to go or where they are now to where they want to go. So either that's for transformation or that is turnaround or growth, helping organizations optimize their back office services. I've been with the organization for about 7 years, and prior to that, worked in consulting at Accenture.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to start with Wade, because Wade has the most credibility of all of us in the room, I think, on the topic, or at least for me. I can only speak for my own behalf. So, Wade, maybe in your role as the person who oversees all these business cases and measures their successes, could you give us some thoughts on some common mistakes that you've seen? And examples might include, typical line items that are kind of over or under projected, or costs that individuals forget to include.
Okay. The most common mistake I see for more the IT or outsourcing types of initiatives is forgetting to take into account the change management aspect of the initiative or the project, or beginning far too late in the assessment of the change management needs. It's something that needs to be taken much earlier and understand how it will impact not just that line of business, but the other parts of the organization, the tools, the processes, the people, and ensuring that if an organization has a change management unit or experts in there, that they're involved. Because generally it's underestimated, it's not thought about until after the decision is more or less solidified in that line of business, and it has a lot more significant impacts than most people take into account.
So can I follow on that comment? So when I think about change management, I think of it in 3 different ways. I'm sure there are lots of different ways, right? We can think about it from the perspective of having the right organization in place, right? Change management. I guess we can think about it in terms of what are the contingencies and kind of anticipation of change in the business case itself. And then we can think of, as a lawyer, I think of also the contractual mechanisms and having some controls around how change takes place and making sure we're not overpaying and underpaying, or how scope is defined. In your experience, what other areas do you think there are, or what would you focus on?
I think that's a good list. I would also tell people to look at the tools, the related tools that the organization may be impacted by this, and processes. If you're, say, outsourcing your accounts receivable or switching providers or something, that could have significant impacts on other parts of the organization that you're not anticipating if you're not involving multiple units and the change management unit there. So it's not just contractual, it could be the people themselves that are doing this day to day need to be brought to speed on understanding what is changing and why it's changing, so they're aligned with the project so it will succeed.
Great. Any comments so far on Wade's response before we move on? Great. Ahmed, how often do you get to work with clients on their business case, and do you have any tips on, as an external service provider, and helping clients reach the proper business case so everyone is aligned in the project?
I think typically organizations like ourselves, obviously when you're looking at large types of outsourcing or sourcing arrangements, you're going to have some partners who are going to be working with you. We mostly provide technology services, IT services, digital transformation, but quite often when you're sourcing these type of engagements, I feel one of the things is we're not probably brought in early enough in a business case. So as Barbara mentioned, I think it's very important to bring some of your key partners. And quite often some of the frustrations we tend to have is when you're collecting information from partners like ourselves, whoever that tends to be, it comes initially in a sort of request for information. And as you're trying to build those business cases to go into, what sort of things are you looking from a partner's perspective. But quite often the the benefits of what you're trying to get out, you're not really sharing that up front or enough of it to be able to help sort of bring back the information to you. And quite often that request comes very much in a last minute thought. So quite often it'll be like 1 week before Christmas, when most people who are going to be able to give value to that information that you're looking for is probably not available. And you're asking for that information within a turnaround of about 2 weeks or something like that. So I would say if it's really important to gain valuable insights from your partners, then try and do it in a way that you're going to get the best information from them, i.e. when people are going to be available, give them enough time. And build that relationship as well. Build relationship with the key partners. You're going to have a range of people. You may choose 1 or 2 of those people, but build enough time to have that relationship and trust with who you, and therefore the information you're going to get is going to be a lot more quality. I think that's the important aspect.
I would echo your sentiment. As an external provider, I always want to be brought in earlier, even if I'm legal and people don't think of legal as being brought into a business case, but I think it's valuable for everyone to understand what's going on. Barb, can I ask you a question, kind of a follow-up from your presentation?
Sure.
So as a lawyer, I'm always focused on risk, but I try to think about risk not just as a downside, but as an upside as well. How much do you think clients of yours, the internal stakeholders who are bringing the business case forward, need to have risk explained to them? I mean, and by that what I mean is, do you think that the reason that risk is understated is because risk as a principle is not understood, or do you think it's some other factors that come into play?
So I would say that there's a couple of things on that. I think that they do not break it, they think of it too broadly as risk, and they do not break it down, as I was using the analogy, into those specifics around financial, organizational, operational, legal, strategic, and what is within there. They also do not tend to break down, so they'll say they might identify a risk in there, but they do not take that step in saying how important is that and how priority is, what is the impact of that particular risk, and then what the probability of that is, and then baking into that the mitigation. So it's getting down into that level of detail. There are, if you actually start to take a look at the risks, the list is very long across all of those, but it's identifying and prioritizing those ones that would have the most impact. So I think that that's really where that's the area where getting into the details, it's there's change risk, there's whatever, but what specifically are those risks in those areas? What is the likelihood? What is the impact of those? Because things like, I'm just mentioning the example that I had, we're working on a business case right now on the project, identifying what specifically the risk, the financial risk is around COLA and Forex. What is the likelihood and impact for a client that has not sourced globally? This will be a risk. And if you do not take that into factor, whether you do not bake that into the pricing, or you do not, or ask the service providers when they propose on that, you do not identify that specifically, that will be a risk that will be certain to come forward. So I think it's the right level of detail, and knowing that there are more risks than you likely would think there are. And so how are you going to address them?
I couldn't agree more. I think that risks have to be aired in the open, right? I think that they have to be discussed. People have to, I find it really valuable to get people to give their feedback on what they think the risks are. There's really fascinating research on risk, right? And this may be getting a little philosophical, but if there's one book I would recommend you read, it's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Anyone ever heard of that? He's a psychologist and an economist, and he's done all kinds of research on how inherently terrible humans are at judging risk from the hip, and it's much better to take a kind of a disciplined approach. And I think that business case is a really good example of doing that. We list them, we talk about them, we're really clear about them, so that we know we're taking risks, we know when we're not taking risks and what they are. So I think it's a really fascinating topic. One of the other issues, Barbara, in your presentation was planning for contingency, and I want to pose this. Go back to Wade for a minute. Do you have any good rules of thumb for contingency, overstating it, understating it? What are the right things to think about?
I think it needs to be tied to the risk in a systematic risk register. If it's left to an individual, it could be if they're risk adverse or not. Sometimes some people they will add a bit more contingency than they should or not because of their own personal bias or viewpoints towards risk. And if there's a systematic risk register and it's viewed through a lot of a process, it can clearly then be linked to what are you awarding contingency for and what are you not. So if a black swan event like we're experiencing now occurs, you can clearly show that this was not accounted for in our contingency and this is going to impact our project. Because generally you do not want to award contingency for these type of events because you'll be overstating every business case going forward because these events don't happen every year or to every project. So it should be identified that we're not awarding contingency for these type of events, and if they do happen, it will derail our project, it will impact our costs, and have that type of discipline risk register type of approach. Like different companies, different areas have different ways of doing this, but it should be systematic as possible and not done just by one individual if possible, because there is a lot of bias. I admit I have my own biases towards risk, and if you put me in a room with someone else, we will come out with a different view. So it should be done more as a group or a team type of activity to make sure that one bias isn't happening versus another.
Ahmed, when you're pitching new work or when you're working with a client on some kind of a new service, a new product, a new offering, how do you deal with expressing the business case of end results that are a bit more speculative? So maybe, and perhaps this is a poor example, but say that what we're trying to do is a new type of data analytics, and we think that in crunching this data, because I'm fascinated with data right now, and everyone wants to figure out how to monetize their data right now, right? All kinds of tools are doing that. What's some advice you'd give on expressing an upside or a more speculative type of end result without losing credibility or without kind of understating the risks? How would you succeed in doing that?
Yeah, I think to the point earlier, so the more the partners, if you brought in early in the process about incentivize, I would say, put some incentives on us to be able to, deliver the business case, but also come up with innovative ways, as Barbara mentioned, creative ways to try and over exceed some of the things. Quite often we will have examples of where if it's incentivized to partners to be able to deliver something beyond the value of the contract, right? Then I think it's important to be able to, for us then to show up and say, these are innovative ways that you could probably exceed those, overstate those cases as you just asked. I think that's what you're asking. How could you?
So incentivize, what you mean is build a model where you're both wearing part of the upside and the downside. So we're sharing the risks and the rewards. I see.
Skin in the game, and also come up with innovative ideas, creative ideas to the partners, because quite often that's the type of things that we'd love to do, in terms of making sure that we come up with creative things. And quite often, even if that's done early in the business case scenarios, it's important to bring those, because you may have not thought of those, and some of the partners or advisors, as Barbara said, would probably give you good advice on those things. Right. But I think the other important thing may be slightly similar to, in the way the new models or new sourcing things are being done, quite often, a lot of the times what is being missed is not what is being delivered, but how it's being delivered. More and more, I'll just give an example of a large oil and gas major we're working with, and I was quite shocked that the product owner there himself, it was a large, in fact, they're creating a whole new digital business, alternative energy digital business in their organization. And when we were starting off, we were so focused, all of us in that room, on what needed to be delivered. And the person himself said, just let's stop. Let's first focus on how we're going to do it. Let's build the culture. Because the more culture we can build on what we want to deliver, how we're going to deliver, sorry, the culture and how we're going to deliver, I think the what becomes secondary. It will become much better. And I think the key thing was, I think what was important was there needed to be investment about building a culture of how to deliver it in the new sort of agile ways of doing things. And I think that was an important aspect that it's, quite often it's the how part gets missed out in these things as well. Yeah.
That's a great comment. You mentioned agile, and that's a great segue. I wasn't sure if I was going to ask this, but let me try. Barb, I'll put you on the spot with agile. We're going to agile here for a moment. Agile is very popular, and for good reason. I also think it's perhaps misused sometimes, the term, but that's my own view. How do you deal with agile development and agile processes in a business case? I guess I don't want to put this in a yes/no answer, but I'll try, and then you can tell me if this is the wrong question. Is it possible to build in the right type of contingency and the right type of understanding and assumptions in an agile business case the way you would for more traditional types of projects?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about that, about how do you build in flexibility into the business case, and it just kind of comes around this, and I think this is what we're getting at, is one of the line items that is often not included, but is a line item in the business case for innovation. And the flexibility that as things change. So that would address part of the agile, but oftentimes the expectation is if you're sourcing something that, well, it's in the contract that we expect that you're going to introduce innovation. And you might negotiate actually a dollar amount around that innovation. But there's also some expectation, it's more and more, that the service providers will come back and say, yes, we're going to innovate, but we also there's a responsibility on the organization as well. So I would say the agile would align to the flexibility as things change, but those things have to be specifically aligned a cost to that, whether it's through innovation or whether or not you add some, we're overusing the word contingency here, but you build in some flexibility in some of your other costs that will allow that as it's flexible, as it's changing and evolving, that you will not have underestimated what those specific cost items would be.
Wade, I saw you kind of.
Yeah, no, there's several ways. I see a number of agile developments or outsourcing occasionally given to me, and there's one way is just to deal with it in some stage type of approval process where there's an initial, this is what we're doing, but we're going to come back at a later date with a stage gate type of approach. But when we're talking more in the contract, yes, I have seen more of the service provider saying, yes, we'll bring this, but we also expect you to do these types of investments on your end. And those do need to be priced in from the overall arching contract type of process. Is it a benefit or not to the organization? And the other aspect is to be open to changing the business case. A lot of people get rigid after it's been approved and say, changing this business case is bad. And that's not a very helpful attitude, because if the world has changed, your business case should change as well. And not all changes or variances to a business case are necessarily bad. I'll give an example from my own organization where they had more customers connecting and it drove up the costs. But that meant we were earning more money. But they were focused so much on the cost, they were viewing it as a bad thing because they were exceeding their budget, even though in the end the organization was much better placed because of this. And we had to actually bring them around and say, no, this is actually what we want to see. This is the type of variance we're happy to bring forward or carry forward. And it was probably the easiest discussion as we went up that anyone had, and they were surprised. So don't be afraid to change your business case and bring it back if necessary, if the world has changed as well. Because in agile development or agile contracts, it will change. So that's the whole point. So you probably will need to bring in some type of stage approval when you bring forward the first business case and say, have some type of governance structure. Different companies have different ways, like committees or reviews or something, and say, we will be back at these times to reaffirm or modify this going forward.
Quick survey. Who here is not excited to bring forth a change of the business case after it's been approved? So that's really great, Wade, because I mean, I just find so often that if there's one thing that no one wants to deal with, it's changing a business case, and it becomes this fixed point around which everything revolves. And it sounds like your advice is that it should be, to a certain extent, maybe not fluid, but you can revisit it.
It depends on the length of the initiative. Right. If you're dealing with a 4 or 5 year outsourcing arrangement, the idea that it's going to be fixed in 5 years, I work in a utility and we do try to forecast out very far, but the world does change. If you think back 5 years ago, no one would have said Donald Trump would have been president, right? So, and that was 5 years ago. So the world does change, things do evolve, and if you have a long-term initiative, you need to make sure that your processes and your culture will allow that flexibility going forward. And that can be difficult, though. It can result in very difficult conversations if things have changed and the business case needs to be recast.
You can also, as I was saying, introduce, I think you said it as well, Wade, is milestones. And attaching milestones so that as you get that, that's an opportunity in the business case to go back and revisit it as well. So, and again, depending on what you're actually doing, what the project is actually doing. So something, whether it's ongoing steady state, looks different than if you're building something new or what that is. So there's a number of ways to be able to address that.
Amit, any views on how to address changing business cases, or?
Yeah, I think like everything, change is a thing that happens. I think everybody. I don't think any arrangements we've been in as part of providers, things change is a constant thing. Risk management is a very, very important part. So business cases do change, especially as Wade said, on a longer term basis. I think the key thing is, and quite often the sponsor, quite often whoever the business sponsor is or the board has changed as well. So they want to reassess the whole thing, whether that engagement should actually go ahead when you get a new sponsor or a board who's come in to address that. And we've seen a lot of different scenarios like that where things have changed, but it's about having the flexibility, but keeping in mind that things will change and what's the best way going forward. So revising it, having the flexibility and the milestones Barbara says to be able to review that on a regular basis and check in and revise it as necessary.
Maybe the answer to managing this is governance. Rishi, can I put you on the spot and see if you wanted to share your questions on governance, or was there anything specific you wanted to share?
I had some actually drilled down questions for Wade about business cases, but we can. You tell me when you're ready.
Go for it. Yeah. Hart, would you mind bringing the microphone over to Rishi?
Sure, everyone can hear you, Rishi. I know, I'm pretty loud.
I think you're keeping on the spot.
Doors there, right? No, but honestly, like we were joking about this before, but in my past life, I used to own a lot of business cases, and I thought it was the best and worst experience in my career, because no matter what you do, you have 30 people who are on you every day, because every small assumption, they're trying to convince you to change the interest rate, or just switch a few people here and there, and you can't win, because as Barbara said, there's no perfect business case. So no matter what you're going to go for, it's going to be an issue. In your organization, or from what you've seen, Amit and Barbara, is there always just one specific individual in the organization who sits in the firing squad, or how do they rotate it? Because that can be a trialing position to be in over.
Well, there is basically there's different. I've seen different organizations handle it different ways. Mine, I'm in the finance unit, so that's where all the business cases ultimately have to go through. But there is. You are right, there's changing assumptions, there's changing viewpoints depending on the line of business bringing it forward. And that's where having a rigorous set of assumptions and being clear this is why we're doing what we're doing and why we're doing it is important. And also to, if it is changing from its previous standard, running it that way, but also running it the original way and saying this is the difference between the two, and this is potentially the risks we're taking or the opportunity we're seizing by changing this, and being clear on those assumptions, especially when the business case goes forward, on what the benefit is and what that benefit is based on. So it goes down to the need or how the scope is being implemented. You're right, it can be difficult, and especially more on the IT side of things, because not everything is known when you're implementing a new system. How is it going to actually work in the organization? So in that case, we try to make sure we have a good understanding of what systems it's going to impact and where we think the benefits are going to be, and be tracked at a later date so it can be assessed after it's been put in. So, but that's, I think one of the things is trying to allow people to take a bit of a risk and not, if things change, not trying to keep it not personal, right? Isn't saying what is the logical reason, why are you taking this position? So, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a speculative question of all three of you, and you can feel free to demur if you'd like. So, right now, it sure feels like we're at this inflection point in time, right? There's a lot of tension around COVID-19. There's a U.S. election. There's the oil crash. Stock market's being, beaten badly right now. How do you see the next year or so playing out? And I don't mean, you can answer as big or as small as you want, but on the day-to-day basis, when you're working on projects that have a business case, do you think that there's going to be a change in the short term in terms of how these things are addressed, risks, benefits, a view towards more or less in terms of risk and benefits? Amit, can I start with you? It's fair.
Having a crystal ball, I think in the short term, the things that are happening at the moment, there was, all of them are unprecedented. I don't think anybody could have built those things into a model. I mean, yes, maybe an oil price correction not correction, actually, it's a pretty bad one, but things like the virus thing, I don't think, that those are exceptional things you have to go back to a board and say, and it's evolving, right? It's not something that even today, many organizations or we as individuals know how things are panning out, right? So it's a very unprecedented thing. I think that's very difficult to build in. You can build some elements, as Wade mentioned, but I don't think you can. Those are exceptional things that you can't put contingencies for. I think looking ahead, I think the potential, maybe a lot more mid to long term. I personally think the digital transformation is still so rapid, in terms of things that are potentially disruptive and opportunistic for organizations, that even what you're trying to do today, in a year's time, things can be drastically different in terms of the opportunities, in terms of some of the things that can change, some new technologies that come you may have not considered in your business case today. That is an opportunity or a threat in the future. So I think those are things that are going to be a lot more prevalent in the field going forward. So, doing things in an agile short sprints is probably the right way, potentially, because you can revise the way you're thinking about things. And even as I was trying to mention, this organizations that's trying to set up a completely new business, they're trying to do it in sprints of 8 to 12 weeks, short things, rather than trying to do this business is going to be launched in 2 years' time. The world would have changed. The opportunities would have changed. Your customer base would have changed. The whole aspect of how energy is consumed would have changed. So they're not taking those risks right now. They're saying, let's try and do these in a small sprints that we can manage that in a shorter scale of things, and try to deliver business value in the short sprints, rather than trying to say we're going to achieve this in 2 years' time, where the conditions can be completely different in the marketplace. So, and both from terms of opportunity as threats. So I think that's maybe the best way I could probably.
That makes perfect sense. Barbara, any thoughts?
I would say, coming back to what we talked about before, when you're building out the business case, is building out alternative scenarios, building out multiple options that are there. It's interesting because one of the projects that I'm working on, that yes, there's no way that you could predict what's happening in the current health situation. You can't predict that there, and you can't build in that kind of contingency into a work plan. So what it's interesting, because I was at call with one of my teams this week, and we said that, yeah, is there going to be a slowdown? Well, it's not. Things aren't going to come to a grinding halt. So as you think about things, how do you actually do what you need to do differently? And so I had a conversation with my team, because they were very focused at one point, well, let's extend the timeline. Let's extend the timeline. And it comes back to the agile piece of it, is that what is the problem you're looking to solve? What are the alternatives, and how can we do it within that time frame, instead of just altering the time frame, which could impact budget on that part of it? Can we do something? What is the problem we're looking to solve? And then what impact is that on timing? So I used the example this morning around virtual and remote, and a couple of things of what the implications of that are. So as you're looking to do this, can we do the way we do business now? Can we actually achieve the project success by doing it a different way? What kind of cost implications, if any, are there? And so it's combination of the agile. You might do those things in short sprints to have that kind of flexibility, but when you're building out options and scenarios, think creatively, go outside of there. Is that, so what could we possibly do? It will also allow you, as you're, if the project is a go-ahead, it allows you to pivot. You've already thought about those things, and you can think about it away without, the conversation with the board is a lot easier if you've thought that through and you've run that scenario. So that's what that would be my comment.
Yep. I would reinforce running the scenarios before you get the business case approved. I would also recommend having the if nothing works out type of scenario run, just so you know the extent of your exposure. And this allows for pivoting when you do go forward, and also aligns the support units that you need to have when you do need to pivot. They actually understand roughly where you're pivoting to. So as you said, no one can predict what's going on in the future, but if you do look back 5-10 years, there's been a lot of change in the last 10 years. And therefore, when you're doing shorter projects, they probably don't need to take that type of change into account. But if you're doing a longer type of engagement, you do need to build the flexibility and the scenarios in to handle change when it does occur.
Maybe a time of uncertainty actually makes us better at dealing with uncertainty. Because I think sometimes that we fool ourselves into thinking we know what's happening in the future when we actually have no way. I thought maybe a good time to open it up to the audience if there are any questions or comments. Or anecdotes. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Ian. I'm with IBM. My question is, and I think some of you have touched on it and come close to it, it's about politics and bias and emotion that can come into play. I think we've all probably been involved in projects where we find out far too late that maybe the baseline was really flawed, or it was incomplete, or there was some people involved in a decision that were maybe not supportive of it, like, for example, in an outsourcing agreement. So what's your experience, or maybe comments on how to mitigate that risk coming into play? Whether there's, again, bias or some political will that's just not there, or running against what the business case is trying to accomplish.
Let's tackle that.
Yeah, I can start. So there's a few things. So this is why I was talking about the importance of the buy-in early, identifying who those individuals need to be involved along the way, and even and the process itself. So let's just talk about getting that buy-in. Oftentimes we find that when individuals are building the business case, they will align themselves with the supporters. So those people that are supporters. I highly advise that you smoke out the detractors early. and get them to understand what the journey is along the way. The other thing too is around the process itself. Make sure, because you talked about the baseline, you talked about the business case, it's really important that as you're building the business case, your process itself is intact. So understanding upfront who is involved, which decisions are going to be made, and having a process that you get in front of them along the way, that journey along the way. That's really, again, at the end of the day where you get that buy-in, but also you can find out early if there's problems. If there's problems, if you've got credibility issues with the baseline, you can course correct up front. It's really hard to do that at the end, which sounds like based on your experience. And you can identify where there would be problems and it doesn't derail it at the end because somebody doesn't like it. Rushi and I were actually working on a project in his past life, and we were working on a project, and we had asked along the way who the detractors were, who were the individuals that needed to be involved, what was the issues that were happening. And we got a lot of and we did that along the way, but we got a lot of, yeah, we got everyone. Yep, we've got everyone. And we got all the way down to the end, and it got into the room where we said, okay, we're ready to make this decision. This is what the project, we've got the go decision. And an individual that was linked to the CEO said, this is not happening because this is not going to be my legacy going forward. And so there was that piece of it. He's nodding his head because he remembers. So we've got all the way down the rabbit hole. We brought everybody what we thought was along the way. And so we had a process in place, but that one key individual, we did not close that loop on that. So it ended up derailing. So I would say it's a combination of get the right people and have a process in place to build them along the way, and do your research. Do the research, bring it to the people. It's really hard for people to say no when it's fact-based. That's another part. You get the emotion out of the way. So it was a long-winded answer, sorry.
That's great. Any other questions from the field? Back here.
Hi, I'm Ria from Manulife, and it's a question for everyone, including yourself. So, because of the data and how we are using data and all the protection that we now need to put around all the data that's getting involved in every kind of project, during the business case preparation, at least in my experience, I've seen a lot of the times that is kind of not considered, and the mitigation plan and the cost related to it. So are you all seeing any changes there? And if so, what kind of mitigation plan you all are seeing that is being put related to data protection?
Okay, I'll take a stab at this one initially. My company does have a lot of personal and customer data, and we do have a lot of legal obligations as well on that, and I'm sure many other companies do on that. And whenever we're dealing with data, as part of our process, we actually have our legal unit also that is accountable for the customer protection or data protection area, as well as there's another group in our information systems. They're actually involved in the business case reviews and making sure that when a business case is brought forward, that there's a standard review group that would take into account those type of issues, because I'm not an expert in customer data protection. I'm an accountant, so that is definitely outside my realm of expertise. I'm aware of it, I understand the issues and potential impacts, but if someone puts something in front of me, I'm not always sure if it has something or not. But we do, when you're bringing these forward, this is about bringing in your stakeholders, having the right people in the room. And in a business case review where there is data, a standard group or stakeholder should be the group that is accountable for data protection. So
I think it's a really great question, and data governance is a really important concept these days, and I think that it's not just a project-specific issue. It's an organizational issue which probably has to go up to the board. And changes are coming to Canada. So we know, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds of data privacy laws, but we know that GDPR exists. And I think a lot of the analysis of GDPR as the European data law has been, does it apply to us or does it not? But some of the insights are being missed, I think, right now because changes are coming to PIPEDA in Canada to mirror more of the concepts from GDPR. It speaks not just to cybersecurity risk and the protection of individuals, but also really important concepts of data portability and data quality. And I think that those are things that are not just about protection and managing risks, but also about managing an important asset. In the banking industry, it's going to be important, for example, in open banking, to move that, for a customer to move their data around. And so I think that this is definitely an evolving area, and I heartily agree with Wade that stakeholders need to be involved, and I think an organizational strategy is also pretty darn important, and there will be both costs and there will be benefits as well.
Just adding to Joel, I mean, having come from the European Union not so long ago, so all the contracts as for the GDPR regulations, so majority of people like yourself, the sourcing vendor management team, had to revise all the contracts that were existing to include the GDPR. So there was a lot of exercises working with your major providers to go back to what are the implications, what are the liabilities. So any new contracts obviously will have the GDPR, but making sure that all the liabilities. So in some cases there's unlimited liabilities imposed by some European companies, especially in the Nordics. So providers like ourselves have to be a lot more important in terms of making sure that those liabilities can be managed. And as you said, Joel, as an organization, it goes right at the our board level to sign off on some of these things. But the important thing is that having contracts, that when you're signing up contracts, those contracts, if GDPR becomes part of the Canadian law system, then all of your contracts that are existing today will have to be revised to make sure that you incorporate them. So all the legacy things, it's an important thing to put into place right now, that those things will be needed to be managed. And working with your providers to make sure that they have enough time to work on those as well, not just yourselves.
Yeah, I mean, a really blatant example, which has been in existence for years and lawyers love to argue about, is the liability cap for data breaches, right? And often that just gets left until the 11th hour to negotiate, and that could be a massive, big unknown cost or contingency that you have to factor, whether it's factors into literally as a line item. I guess I'm not sure, but it's certainly something to consider, and also just the reputational risk and some of these issues as well.
It depends, and you're talking about the line item though, because I think that the question was as you're building out the business case. So there's, if you are in an industry, you're talking about being in the financial services industry, you know that regulatory requirements are constantly changing, and how you handle data. So if the project, if there's a potential that would be impacted by regulatory changes that you have to include that as a cost in your business case, because it is an implication, whether it's the data itself or the resources to manage that. So that's something that's how you would, from a business case perspective, you need to consider that. And that would change by industry, obviously.
Great question. Any other questions, comments? How early are we, Rushi? Are we right?
Perfect, exactly.
Right on time?
We're doing perfect.
Okay.
We have time for one more question if there is one, otherwise.
Okay. If there are no further questions, let's give a hand to our panelists. Really great job, guys.
So just a huge thanks to everyone, Joel, Barbara, Amit, Wade. Barbara brought back some dark memories of that project. Remember that now. I remember being on the airplane, not knowing what to do, but good times. Thanks for that. Thank you again, Tories, for hosting us. Thank you for all who showed up today. The video will be posted next week. I'll let you know about some of the upcoming events that will be posted, but we have a big session coming next month on sustainability. So that's always been what people thought would be a negative cost in an organization, but we have two leaders in sustainability. Talking about how sourcing is poised to be a leader here. Sustainable practices can actually save you money, and what the circular economy is planning to look like. So that's coming up next month. Our Women in Sourcing event was due for this month. It will be postponed for at least a quarter as things settle down. But we do have our courses running in governance, transition, risk management, and we have a new course starting in June on buying cloud, which is being geared for non-technology people who are responsible for cloud contracts and have to understand what service levels are, hybrid cloud, public cloud, private cloud, to make sure we're all up to speed. It'll be taught by IBM. Looking forward to that. But again, thank you to our speakers, thank you to Joel and Tori's, and I'll see you at the next event. Thanks, everyone.